listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug. I'm your host, Joseph Maxwell, and we've had a really good slate of incredibly intelligent people here joining the show, and this one is no disappointment. We're going to be talking about a lot of interesting subjects today, so keep listening. Don't just turn it off. I haven't said the name right away, so just don't turn it off. Let's keep talking. As always, make sure that you subscribe to this our YouTube channel, so you'll find these shows over on YouTube under the SwiftOtter channel, as well as Smash the Bug on Apple and Spotify and a couple of others as well. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest today, James Cowie. He is a solution architect at a wonderful agency called Inviqa, and he's had a lot of experience in this space. He has fought through a lot of problems, and he has come out the victor, as evidenced by his incredibly wonderful-sounding job title. And, of course, he is certified. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he talks about. So, welcome, James. It is a pleasure having you on the show here today. Thanks for coming on.
It's awesome to be here. You've been one of those mentors in the community for such a long time, and being able to just shoot the breeze with you for half an hour is awesome. I really appreciate what you do.
That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. That'll be good. So, James, I always like to start out by asking, 30 seconds to a minute. What do you do at Inviqa? What is your day usually look like there?
It looks crazy, but it's a lot of e-commerce. Inviqa are one of the UK leading e-commerce specialists. So it's a lot of pre-sale shaping. It's working with our team and really looking at the open source technologies that we can utilize with the founders of Behat MageSpec, all those cool technologies that we're now trying to utilize and bring into the Magento 2 sphere. So it's a lot of looking at problems, working with our team on e-commerce solutions. I don't get to write as much code as I used to do, but it's helping shape what the overall client solution looks like. And I'm that bridge between customer and development team. So making sure that the client doesn't want too much, but our developers don't deliver too little. It's a really awesome opportunity to see it on both sides of the coin.
Nice. So when you say you're the bridge between the development team and the customer, the merchant, does that mean that you literally are at that point of contact, or is there a project manager that you kind of share, or account manager that you share that role with, or is it James Cowie is the one that literally interacts with your slate of merchants?
Oh no, we're very open. So I'm just one of the cogs in the wheel. Our project managers are normally the key relationship manager, and I'm there to make sure that we shape the solution. We want to make sure that we're not just looking at today's Magento problems, but we're looking at what's going to happen in 12 months' time. Because as you know full well, once you make the commerce store better, the problems start to get bigger. They don't go away. You find problems are bigger problems. So it's making sure that our architecture actually is in line with what clients want, not just today, but in the future, and making sure that our development teams are actually aligned with that. They know that the bug that they're solving or the ticket that they're working on, it doesn't just impact a line of code or a database table. It impacts real revenue. And it has to be sustainable for the future.
Absolutely. But that's well put and very good. So if I remember correctly, we've had some interaction in the past about code reviews. And you've had some good comments about that. I'm guessing you've done quite a few code reviews yourself. You've had the title CTO in the past. So there's a lot that you have under your belt as far as working with developers, as far as the code reviews. And from a developer's perspective, code review is kind of that watershed moment where their hard work, their investment, is either accepted or denied. And that's a little more graphic than it probably is in reality, or at least it should be. But it is kind of a testing ground, and it's a moment of truth. Every one of us developers wants the work that we do to be perfect, no problems out of the gate. We're like the best developers, but in reality, that's why we have a code review, to kind of put that second look in at the work we've done. So what are some of the things that you have found are particularly important when it comes to approaching this somewhat delicate process, and how do you use this to work with the teams that you have been a part of?
No, definitely. A great question. And I come from a teaching background, and I remember a bit of a story time, but many, many, many years ago, we're probably talking about 15 years ago now. I had a code review, And I'd worked for 2 weeks on this feature. I was so excited about it. I was like, this is the most perfect code that anybody's ever seen in the world. So I took the laptop over. Well, at this time it was a tower. And I was like, hey, my senior developer, look at this code. And I was walking him through it. I was like, look at this. I've got abstraction, OOP, single responsibility. And he sat there. This code, crap, not good. You've done this wrong. This indentation is wrong. You should not do it this way. And I was like, oh my word, I've spent all this time and effort trying to build out the most amazing solution.
Man.
And it's been kicked back. And I said from that day onwards, I am never, ever going to have a code review for me personally to be like that again, but for anybody that I ever work with, because code review, yes, it's a gate catcher to make sure that defects don't go into production, but it's knowledge sharing. It's more than just one way. It's not the reviewer critiquing the work that's been done. It's an opportunity for that developer to explain, why did you do something? Why did you use an observer versus, a plugin? What was the rationale behind that? Because there was a logical reason why you chose implementation over implementation B. And it's really about sharing that knowledge, making sure that, yes, the solution that the merchant, the client, whoever it is requested is met. But how do we make ourselves better? How do we learn from this? Because what I found, especially running teams as CTO, is that knowledge gets siloed quite quickly. You'll solve a problem on client A, and then you'll reinvent the wheel on client B. So taking that as an opportunity to learn from it, like, why did you do this? Why is the indentation done this way? Or why was X done in an appropriate way? Is more valuable than what code was wrote. And it's a great way of being able to develop yourselves further as well. Because me as a code reviewer, when I was acting as CTO, I learned so much. There were so many times where I looked at a problem that one of my developers was solving with UI components. And I was like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Like, tell me more about this. And even though we were reviewing his piece of code at that time, we go through a curveball where it's like, I never realized you could use the JavaScript in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Then we had sidetracks from that where it was like, right, you've done this amazing solution. It meets what the client requirement is. Now can you do a code club on that? Now train my team, make it so that the knowledge you've built for this one implementation gets shared with the wider audience. And that's why I feel code reviews are so important. And it has to be less about that I'm reviewing your code, but more of a, I'm presenting you my solution. Now you tell me, is it knowledgeable? Is it the way that it should be? How can we make it better and more sustainable? Less about, is it spelled correctly or wrong? It's more about that end, like training, sharing knowledge, embracing the opportunity to grow all of us instead of it just being one dimensional.
That's really well put. And what I hear you saying, like, some overtones, you didn't say this exactly, and so correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm assuming too much, but it basically like comes down to both the person who has submitted their code for review and the reviewer needs to both check their ego.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not a time for you to like, hey, I'm a better developer, or like your code is crap, like the story you shared. It's a matter of helping people to grow and to be willing to grow yourself.
Yep.
Because ultimately the reviewer might not be 100% correct. Maybe they're in a hurry and
exactly.
They might miss something. And so it's a matter of the developer to come back and say, hey, well, here was why. And actually that does bring up a good point. So what would be the ideal setup that a developer can do going into a code review? So they've just done they have their feature branch, they've committed their code. Well, they're about to commit their code. So starting at that point, what would you say would make a reviewer's job as easy or as intelligent as possible, i.e. by this developer who is about ready to commit some code and start the pull request process?
Yeah, so the way that I like to run code reviews is a little bit different to the normal. Normally what you do is developer would write the code, create the pull request, and then submit that for somebody to review. That's great because you can do it in your own time. If there's no time pressures, the code reviewer can look at the GitHub, the Bitbucket, or the diff and take a look line by line to see what's changed. That's okay if you're just doing the grading of homework. But the way that I like to run them is that it's a collaborative workshop. So, in order to prepare for the pull request and the code review to go ahead, you need to make sure that the ticket is well documented. It clearly states out what is the acceptance criteria. So, I, as user, want to do X, and this is how it's going to be achieved. So, if it's a promotional, like one of the code reviews I looked at recently, it was about stacking promotions together. So, the ticket, before the code review had to happen, the developer went back and made sure that the ticket actually documented what the stacked promotions had to be. So it was given as I'm a user, I want to have promotion A with coupon code Y inputted with a buy one get one free added on top. So it's quite clear with a nice scenario that I could go back and do at my own leisure to make sure that that part of it was known to us all. I then don't just want to review the code. I want to have a workshop where the developer itself presents the code solution to me. So we get on a 10-minute Zoom call or a Google Hangout, and they open up a shared browser and say, here's what I wrote, and here's now how it works in the browser. This is what I've done, and here's the supporting documentation that shows what it is that we've actually achieved. That way, it removes that one-sidedness, but it does have to have that ego removed. And both parties to be a bit humble. And then when you talk more about what is the requirements going into that meeting, again, it's that ticket documentation, acceptance criteria, any test scripts that have been made, make sure that they're really available. We use a lot of Behat, and we continue to use BDD as a tool to make sure that what we're trying to solve in a pull request and a code fix actually meets the expectation. So it's given when then, and that allows me to understand as a code reviewer, what was the problem domain that we were trying to solve? I don't care about the code at this point. What is the solution that we're trying to get to? And then I can have that conversation about, did you use the correct model? Was it a resource model or a collection? Are you using iterators versus whatever? But at least I know what is it we're trying to solve in a nice way. And then we have a really good conversation about how did you solve it? What problems did you face while you were actually solving it? Locally, did you notice that your database was quite slow? Even though we've got a stripped down version of the database, did you notice that applying 2 stack promotions caused a 2-minute or 2-second delay? How did you get around that? Is that something that we need to worry about when we go into production? What about when Black Friday comes? And that allows me then to have that type of conversation, which you would never have if all you were doing was looking at line by line what changed. It just wouldn't happen in that way. But it is so paramount that that pre-scripted user stories, the definition, the acceptance criteria is put in that ticket so that you can have a structured conversation.
Wow, that's really good, and I love your suggestions about just getting together with the developer. Have that workshop, 10-minute workshop, and that will make better quality code in the long run. Have used some terms that I'm not sure everybody will be familiar with, so let's dive into those. About I think it's in relation to testing. You talk about BDD and Behat. Can you give like a brief overview as far as what those are, and then how those, again, for our listeners, how those tie in with the code review process?
Oh, definitely. So I'm a huge testing advocate. Vinay, who we all know, he introduced me to the gateway drug, which is testing, and I'm now a testing addict thanks to him. One day he'll pay for my therapy and recovery. But is really behavioral driven development. So you've got test driven development and behavioral driven development. One looks at units of code, one looks at solutions in a more abstract way. And I like BDD because it actually allows you to look at user scenarios. So you're more concerned about what is it that an end user is trying to achieve versus what does this unit of code actually do. If we're going to talk about test-driven development in a code review perspective, it's great because you can still look at the unit tests themselves and analyze them, run them, make sure that they run. But behavioral-driven development is more consumable by project managers, account managers, and the client. You take the basic format of Gherkin, which is the template language you use, which specifies, given I want to do something, when I perform this action, then the outcome should happen. So in the scenario of the stacked promotions, it was given I'm a VIP user and I want to apply 2 promotions at the same time. Then when I apply a coupon code and I've added a product from this specific category, then I should see the deduction of 2 promotional codes. And that's something that you don't have to be a developer to understand. You can read that given when then, oh, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and this is how it's going to be solved by looking at the code. So it's a really good way of bridging that gap between non-technical and technical people in quite a low friction way.
That's fascinating. Yes, because we've been working to do more like integration tests and some of that stuff, which I think is maybe a little bit more toward the behavioral driven development, a little bit in that direction, away from test driven development. But at the end of the day, I like that template language, because again, that's very easy to see, and it's easy to see it passes or it fails. Like, I mean, it couldn't be any more explicit. So that's really cool to hear. Okay.
That's it. And Behat is the engine that runs it. So that was, I've been lucky. Everzet was one of my mentors a long time ago at Inviqa. He built Behat and PHP spec, and he taught me on the way of using it with PHP. There are alternatives. If you're in the Java world, you've got Cucumber, and even in the JavaScript world, Cypress.io can do behavioral driven development given when then. So Behat's just the PHP implementation of the engine.
Excellent. Okay. Well, that's really good. So yeah, the code reviews done right. So making sure that we have. I'm gonna see if I can summarize what we just talked about there. So the idea is doing this together. Really good documentation on the actual ticket itself. Ideally, we have test coverage that's easy to understand. Your recommendation was BHAT, behavioral driven development. And I think, am I missing a part of that summary? I feel like I am, but
no, that's perfect.
Okay.
And one thing that I found useful, especially with more junior or people new to a project, is ignore code review. Do a code preview. Talk to your senior developer, your colleague. I've not wrote this code yet, but I'm thinking about doing this, and this.
That's a great idea.
There's no reason why you can't spend 5 to 10 minutes doing a code preview before you actually get to the implementation. And then when you get to the code review, treat it as a retrospective in the agile world. So in my code preview, I was going to do this, and this. Yet in the actual code review, I didn't do that, and that. And these are the reasons why. You will notice over the course of a few weeks to months, the quality of your code and the deliverable to the end user is so far better. And the knowledge that you share between the team, you can't get that any other way, in my personal opinion.
Well, it's kind of like thinking like an architect. I mean, that's you are pre-building your solution and you're executing on it, and then you come back and look later, and it's like, oh, well, that didn't make sense, and you're tweaking it as time goes on. One thing I'm really curious about, and I want to pick your brain here. You mentioned earlier, and it's an incredibly valid point, that knowledge is quickly siloed.
Yeah.
You have a problem that we solve for company A, and that same problem pops up on company B, a different developer tackles it. What is your solution for such a problem? Because it happens a lot, and the question is like, how do you make knowledge, call it universal or ambiguous enough that it matters, that works in multiple situations, because ultimately the finer points probably will vary, right, between different merchants, but it's that root problem will be the same for both of these merchants. How do you approach that type of documentation?
War game scenarios. So this is my Call of Duty coming back to me.
All right, let's hear it.
Every week we ran a code, or we still run a code club, and those code club topics vary. But out of the month, we run a war simulation. This problem happened on this client. This is how we solved it. How would we solve it again? That way, all of the team is aware of what's happening and how we're solving problems, and we continuously rerun those scenarios. So we had an outage a few weeks back where one of the MySQL servers got overloaded because Elasticsearch was down. So it defaulted back to the default. And what we're going to run for the next 6 weeks is war game scenarios of what happens if Elasticsearch goes down. How are we going to fix it? And we do the exact same scenario for code as well. If you've got a conflict with two modules, how are you going to resolve that conflict? And we'll go low level into the actual client specific so that we can share that knowledge. And we continuously reinforce that because it's so easy to reinvent the wheel. You're in panic mode. I'm a really big system thinker.
Yes.
I love a technology or a tool called Kinefin, which you've got the different domains from normal to chaotic to out of control and completely crazy. And when you're solving a problem, you're in chaos. You don't care about best practices. You want to fix it as quickly as possible and forget about it. You want to move it back to that normalization phase. But the step that people forget is by bringing it into normalization, how can you stop yourself going back to chaos?
Yes.
And that's by continuously reinforcing it to the team and not just one department. And war games help do that. I should probably think of a better name because war games, especially in our climate, is not the ideal, and we never want to be in war. But making sure that people can continuously know what we've solved, why we solved it, and how can we resolve that, and then making sure that the wiki is up to date. Every company has a wiki. I'm sure if we all look at when the last modified date was, we'd be quite ashamed. But making sure that it's everybody's responsibility, not just us as developers, account managers, and project managers. If we solved a critical code problem on a client and we update the wiki, make sure that the project manager puts their take on it, because it isn't just a developer problem, this sharing of knowledge and siloing of knowledge.
Absolutely.
It takes an entire team to solve it.
You are 100% right. And that's well put. Yes. I love your idea of that consistent knowledge transfer and then specifically trying to work out those situations like, okay, we had an emergency here. So how do we, what are some other ways that we can solve this? That's absolutely brilliant. It's being proactive as opposed to reactive.
Yeah.
Well, it was reactive once and then taking that and making it proactive in the future.
Yeah. And then we've got cheat sheets. So some of it we can update via Terraform. Some bits are just, if you've got problem X, go here, here's the solution. Making sure that that's continuously updated and new hires know where to go. But more importantly, existing team members know that it's their responsibility as well to go there and update it. And treating that shared learning and ongoing learning as part of our jobs, it has to be done.
Yes. Well said. Well said. That is good. Let's move into an interesting separate topic here. You kind of touched on it, I think, when you talked about what you do for Inviqa here at the beginning, and that is working to get ahead of problems or getting ahead of stuff that happens 12 months down the road.
It's a tricky one.
What's that?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? But yeah, carry on, sir.
It is, because as a developer, or actually in your case, a solution architect, I understand how that's your responsibility. And yet I think for most people, most of us, it's really fuzzy. And how do you actually do that? Right? I mean, it sounds great on paper, and we all have our opinions. For example, just as a kind of a bad example, but we all have our opinions as far as what's going to happen with Adobe Commerce and versus open source. I think that's kind of a different category. I mean, this is specifically looking at a merchant and saying, okay, 12 months down the road, where do you think this is going to end up, or what problems are we we're fixing one problem here that's just going to kick the can down it's kind of that bottleneck theory, right? So we fix a bottleneck here. Well, we're just going to go find the next bottleneck. So how do you approach, from a developer perspective, thinking 12 months down the road?
Yeah, so from a developer's perspective, we look at scale and we use automated testing to throw a load of traffic at the environments to make sure that if what we're doing now has a positive or negative effect based on the amount of perceived revenue or traffic conversions that we're going to get to the project. So every fix that we make is purely to make sales easier for our customers' customers. So we'll put speculative guesses together around, if we fix this promotional issue that I keep talking about, how much more revenue is that going to build? So we'll automate it via Surge and additional tools to hammer the servers to see, right, at the minute we're getting this amount of traffic based on Google Analytics. If we've done our job well and additional unknown factors that we can impact also play out, we're going to get a 10 to 20% return on traffic coming to the site. So how would that hold up? What other unknowns is that going to uncover? That's the most basic way of us being able to check whether our code is future-proof or not. Now, as a solution architect, what I look at is that layer above the code. It's like, how is our solution going to be more future proofed? And that's where having the embedded code review process helps me out there, because I'm able to understand what constraints the developers have had. They're constrained by time, budget, all the stuff that we hope we're never constrained about, but they've got constraints on what they can do. So when I hear back from them, and I like to sit into the code reviews, and they say, the solution that I've built now is going to work, but if you wanted to add a third promotion onto that, it isn't going to work. That allows me as the architect to say, right, you know what, our next phase of development now needs to look at, is the client actually requiring additional promotions? Is there a use case for that? And then I can scope the technological landscape to make sure that it moves 12 months down the line. And our developers can then use their automated load testing to make sure that their solution is going to hold up to that traffic. And the other game that we like to play is the what if game. The old team members that I've got hated it when I joined a meeting, and it's like, so David, what if we do this? And he's like, well, what if we did that, Cowie? The client hasn't asked for it. And he's like, okay, Regina, what if this happened? What if I remove that promotion and then apply 2 more? And she's like, no, you can't do that. And that helps, because that allows us to use what if this is going to go live in 12 months time, and we're looking and talking about how it scaled. Did it scale or not? And I treat that as shared responsibility. It's my responsibility as the architect, but as long as I know that the team's doing the load testing to make sure that their code is going to run nicely. At Inviqa, we use chaos testing from Netflix to try and throw random bugs in there, and it makes sure that we're not breaking and the inventory system by putting promotions in place. But with the good automated practices, and then the what if game and the solution architect, means that we can always future predict. But that does require an element of the client being on board as well. And that's why I love behavioral driven development, because we always ask, what do you need now? But what is your end goal? What's your future vision for the e-commerce? You don't just want this bug fixing. You want X on top of this. What does that look like as well? So trying to meld all that into one is quite tricky, but we get in there with the user stories, the acceptance criteria, and we also do a future mapping session. So what does the future look like that the client can always look at and understand why our architectural decisions today were the reason we made that decision and how it impacts the future. So we can say, we're not sure about Adobe Commerce in the future. This is why we've betted on it now. But here are the risks that you've got around that. Here's how we can mitigate that risk with these different solutions and abstractions. And this is what we would do in 12 months' time.
Okay. Well, that's good. That is a very thorough approach, and I appreciate that. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot out there that don't take that approach, maybe because resource constrained or whatever. And I think that's very admirable, and I think it's a great example that service providers need to be following. Is looking down the road, providing the very best practices to ensure the greatest stability possible. And so that's our job, and that's what we have to live by. And so, yeah, that's really good. That's really, really good.
And we're all in this for partnerships. If you take the e-commerce perspective and the business things out of life, out of what we do, we're humans that are built around partnerships and relationships. So if we take our human nature and try and apply that to business, that's what we're wanting. So the days of building an e-commerce store and then disappearing, they're long gone. We want to be, and SwiftOtter, I know you guys, you're exactly the same. You want long-term relationships where you continuously add that value. And that's what makes the Magento world so great, because we're all in this for the long run.
That's right. Absolutely. Yes. And it's delivering consistent quality, consistent value makes a big difference. I show we have about 30 seconds left. Do you want to close us up with what if you had like 1 or 2 suggestions to give to your fellow developers here all across the world? What would that suggestion be? Like, how could a suggestion for be better developer or whatever? Like, what would your number one suggestion be? And I know I'm pulling a fast one on you here, so let's see how quick you can think.
Believe you're a child. Take that child intuition and always question why. It doesn't matter how many years experience you've got. Think like a 5-year-old child and question why and want more. Ignore the people that say, no, it can't be done. No, we can't do that. You can still be that child inside that says, I want to do this. I want to learn that. And think like a child, because you will embrace more, learn more, and have a damn better life for it.
Dude, you could not have said it any better. Wow. And I pulled a fast, and that was a fast one. You nailed it. That was really good. I don't think anybody could have stated that any better. So thank you for that. That was excellent. That is definitely quote worthy. That needs to get pulled out and thrown into the podcast show notes. Just very clearly, like one of those tweetable.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I mean, I've looked up to you for a long time. Your guides have helped me and thousands of people around the world. So you are an absolute credit, not only to the Adobe world, but to us as people. So to have you as a friend and to be on this is a huge honor and a life achievement. So thank you very much again.
Well, it's a life achievement for me to have you on. I respect you. You've helped out. You've given guidance on our stuff as well, and I covet those relationships, and that has helped make me a better person, help us have better output, which helps everybody around the world. So we're both in the same boat, and I am incredibly grateful for your advice and coming on this show and sharing a little bit of what you've learned over the past 15 years. So James, thank you. Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
You too, my man. Take care.
It was an absolute pleasure having James Cowie on the show here. It's kind of hard to summarize his level of depth in 30 minutes, but one thing I very clearly see above anything else that we talked about is his dogged focus on quality, being better, understanding bigger problems, delivering better solutions. And that is, well, just like he summed it up at the very end, think like a 5-year-old. That it all comes back to this, and he has the curiosity of a 5-year-old and the experience of a I don't know, thrown out a number here, a 7-year-old. Like, I mean, that's it, and it's that type of combination that makes someone incredibly valuable in the job market, working with merchants, providing solutions at an agency or for a merchant, wherever you work. Besides, I mean, all the other great stuff we talked about, that is the single greatest standout to me. So it's a mind game, folks. It's a matter how you view life. It's a matter how you view yourself. It's a matter how you view the work that you work on. It's a mind thing. So keep up the great work, my friends. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and looking forward to another one coming out very shortly.